Hello friends, this news is very cruel, but the fact it is killed in the name of religion makes it even more serious. In my opinion, Ethiopia keeps hidden one of the three ancient replicas of the Ark of Covenant. The first would be in Jerusalem in Jeremiah's cave under Calvary, according to Ron Wyatt. The second one would be hidden in Spain, according to Albert Canosa, who promises to bring it out at the right time of the prophecy. And the third ark would be in Ethiopia, according to Graham Hancock. The image in the video is the drawing made by Ron Wyatt after seeing the ark. Today, I am going to take a break from politics to go in search of the lost ark, like in the film. Opinion article: Walk for the Ark of the Covenant. 750 Ethiopian civilians shot. It's likely that the ark was hidden in St. Mary of Zion Church, Aksum, Ethiopia. The Ethiopians believe that the Ark of the Covenant is kept there. The soldiers of Amhara shouted the Ark belongs to Addis Ababa. People were concerned about the safety of the Ark and stood in the way. European Union suspends budget support to Ethiopia over Tigray crisis. Ethiopia is headed for a large-scale humanitarian crisis, according to the United Nations. British journalist Graham Hancock discovered the Ark in Ethiopia in 1989. American archaeologist Ron Wyatt found the Ark in Jeremiah's grotto. It was sealed with cement by the Israeli government after the death of military personnel. Cement, I mean concrete. All those who approach the Ark without being prepared spiritually die. The cave of Zedekiah in Jerusalem is very important for the Masonic tradition. Dead Sea Copper Scroll reveals treasure hunt in Temple of Jerusalem. Let's start. A massacre of some 750 civilians is said to have taken place near the Church of St. Mary of Zion in Aksum, which is said to house an authentic replica of the Ark of the Covenant in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. The stories come from those who fled the city of Aksum and walked more than 200 kilometers to the regional capital Mekelle. It is estimated that more than 2 million children have been left without food or assistance. The advancing soldiers caused consternation. Ethiopians believe that the chapel in the compound houses the biblical site of the Ark of the Covenant. It can only be seen by a monk designated as his guardian. There was a great commotion. According to reports, the soldiers of Amhara shouted that the Ark belongs to Addis Ababa. According to Ethiopian tradition, the chapel of the tablets in the Church of Our Lady of Zion would house the Ark of the Covenant. The attack. The attack began after Ethiopian federal troops and Amhara militia approaches to St. Mary of Zion Church. It is believed that up to 1,000 people took refuge in this religious complex. Ethiopian Christians believe that one of the chapels, the chapel of the tablet, contained the Ark of the Covenant, which would be hidden from view, except for a single priest who never leaves the compound. The people were worried about the safety of the Ark, and when they had the troops approaching, they feared they had to come to steal it, and all those inside the cathedral were forced out into the square. A latest dispatch on the situation in Tigray last Tuesday reports that 750 people were shot in Aksum, although this has not been verified. They say the massacre was carried out by Ethiopian federal troops and Amhara militias. The church is not believed to have been damaged, and it is likely that the ark was hidden before the troops arrived, although it has not been possible to confirm this. The massacre was first reported in the offices of the Belgian-based non-government organization European External Programme with Africa. The area is close to journalists, but nevertheless many reports of massacres have emerged, some of which have been documented by Amnesty International. World Heritage Site. Ethiopian Orthodox Christians believed that the ark was hidden in Aksum by Menelik I, the son of King Solomon of Israel. The kingdom of Aksum was one of the four great powers of the ancient world, and the city of Aksum is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Clashes broke out in Tigray in November after the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sent federal troops supported by Eritrean militias and troops to fight the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which he accused of holding illegitimate elections, although it was part of Ethiopia's ruling coalition until 2019. The government declared that the conflict had ended after Mikel's capture in late November, but the front continues to wage guerrilla warfare. The Ethiopian government admitted to bombing a former mosque in Tigray and promised to repair it. The Al-Nehasi Mosque in northern Tigray was hit by shells, and its dam, a minaret and ancient tombs, allegedly those of 15 disciples of the Prophet Muhammad, were damaged. A nearby church was also damaged in the attack, and the government has pledged to repair it. After the bombing, the mosque had been looted by Ethiopian and Eritrean troops, and some civilians had tried to protect it. Humanitarian aid has not been able to reach the region despite pleas for the UN, which estimate that 2.5 million children have been deprived of food and aid. More than 1 million people have been displaced by the fighting, and more than 50,000 have fled to Sudan. The safety of many Eritrean refugees in Tigray's camps is also a concern. Humanitarian crisis. Ethiopia is headed for a large-scale humanitarian crisis, the United Nations warned, as 2 weeks of fighting and report of a massacre in Tigray region have been sent thousands of civilians fleeing for safety. The United Nations Refugee Agency reported on Tuesday that more than 27,000 people has crossed the border into Sudan, overwhelming the efforts of humanitarian response teams, and tens of thousands more are believed to be on the move. There is also concern for thousands of Eritrean refugees in Tigray, as the distance between their camp and fighting between government forces and forces loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the rallying group in the region, narrows. The UN, calling for talks and an immediate cessation of hostilities, has warned that the conflict could spread and destabilize the entire region. Last year, Abiy won the Nobel Peace Prize for the agreement he reached with neighboring Eritrea and the end end the border conflict between the two countries. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church Tewahedo is one of the oldest organized Christian bodies in the world, and the Christians make up almost 2/3 of the country's population. The majority are Orthodox, followed by Protestants and Roman Catholics. 1/3 of the population is Muslim. History. St. Mary of Zion's Church is located in Aksum, Ethiopia, and belongs to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and one of the patriarchates of the Eastern Orthodox Church. It is in this basilica where, according to tradition, the Ark of the Covenant is kept, which would have been deposited there by Menelik I, son of Solomon. Women are forbidden to enter the interior of the basilica. Another tradition states that it was built during the reign of Ezana, the first Christian ruler of the kingdom of Aksum, present-day Eritrea and Ethiopia, during the 4th century. Since its foundation, the bishopric of San Frumencio, the church has been destroyed and rebuilt at least twice. The first destruction occurred at the hands of Queen Gudit in the 10th century. The second was in the 16th century by Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, after which it was rebuilt by Emperor Gelaudeus, and then extended by Fasilides in the 17th century. St. Mary of Zion has been the traditional place where the emperors of Ethiopia have always been crowned. In the 1950s, Emperor Haile Selassie built a new cathedral, open to both men and women, close to the old one, which remains open only for men. Is the Ark in Ethiopia? According to Daniel Sparta, in mid-2015, a short report published by National Geographic put the issue back on the table. The monks who live in the small church of St. Mary of Zion, also called the Chapel of the Ark, is the sacred Ethiopian city in the sacred Ethiopian city of Aksum, are forbidden to cross the gate that surrounds the chapel. They cannot abandon the task entrusted to them to watch over the tabot, as they call the tables of the law in Ethiopia, until the day they die. Abba Gebre Meskel, 56 years old, has already been at it for 3 decades. According to the narrative contained in the book of Exodus from the Bible, the tablets of the law, made of stone, contain the 10 commandments that Yahweh gave to Moses on Mount Sinai. Some date the event to around 1440 before Christ. Many apocryphal legends circulating in North Africa and some regions of the Middle East attribute supernatural powers to the tablets. Many others were women around these legends, including the Nazi obsession with the occult and relics that would delight Hollywood and give Indiana Jones one of his most applauded missions on the big screen. But the truth is that after the destruction of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, no one knows for sure where the Ark of the Covenant went. Having disappeared without a trace and without any known record of its whereabouts, the place where it could be found remains today one of the great enigmas not only of history but also of archaeology. What is certain is that almost 45 million Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, Copts, are convinced that the Ark of the Covenant was taken almost 3,000 years ago to Aksum in northern Ethiopia, and since being zealously guarded by these monks in the small church of Saint Mary of Zion. According to Coptic tradition, the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon had a son called Menelik I, the founder of a dynasty of Solomonic emperors who, for 3,000 years, ruled Ethiopia. He would have been in charge of moving the precious chest of gold and acacia wood. According to the deacon of the Zedekiah Brane temple, in quotes, God himself chose this land, and Aksum is our holiest city. The men of the West always need visible proof, but the Ethiopians do not need to see the ark to know that it is there, that it is here. We simply feel it. Only for 7 days a month, and before sunrise, the monks of Saint Mary of Zion take a copy of the ark in procession. In fact, each Ethiopia, nearly 50,000 Orthodox churches, treasures one of these copies. The procession is traditionally attended by almost 1,000 people, but the old chapel of Our Lady of Zion seems to have already fulfilled its purpose, since various leaks in its roofs have forces the monks to begin the construction of a new temple, right next to the current one, to which a monk in absolute secrecy will move the ark. No one will know until the next day, said the deacon of the temple. Legend. In 1989, British journalist Graham Hancock assured that the legendary lost ark was not so lost, but safe in a temple in Ethiopia. Archaeological evidence have subsequently emerged to support this theory. It is based on the accounts and texts such as the Gebra Nagast belonging to the Coptic Christian Church in Ethiopia, which indicate that the Ark of the Covenant was secretly moved from more than 2,000 years ago, exactly 650 years before Christ. The sacred book of Ethiopia, the Gebra Nagast, tells that in the time of Solomon, the Queen of Sheba visited Jerusalem attracted by the wisdom of its king. The Queen of Sheba began to exert an irresistible attraction on the son of David, who, in spite of his wealth and intelligence, was unable to seduce the beautiful sovereign. The time came for Sheba to leave, and Solomon managed to wrest a promise from her that in the case she would take with her some precious good of the kingdom, she would consent in return to lie with him only one night. On the eve of the trip, Solomon offered his guests a dinner of exquisite delicacies. He cleverly ordered that the dinner be seasoned with abundant salt and spices. After the dessert, the queen had to drink a lot of water to quench her thirst. The Queen of Sheba kept her promise, and from that one brief union with Menelik I, the future king of Ethiopia was born. Accounts indicate that years later, the young Menelik was sent to his father's house in Jerusalem to be educated. A few years later, despite Solomon's effort to have his son stay, Menelik returned to Ethiopia. The tradition tells that, seduced by his assistants, he took the ark with him. Some theories postulate that in order to take the ark, there was a possible exchange of the original chests for a copy that Menelik had to take. It is possible that that copy is the ark that is said was hidden in Jordan. On the other hand, other theories postulate the possible existence of two original coffers, or that they had the same importance, where in each one was kept possibly one of the tables of the law, being one of them the one that was taken to Ethiopia. Later, the accounts indicate that it remained first in a temple of the island of Elephantina in the Nile River. Then it is related how the Ark of the Covenant would have been placed in a kind of tabernacle on the island of Tana Kirkos, located in Lake Tana, where it remained for 800 years. The stories point out that after these 800 years, King Ethana of Ethiopia decided to move the ark to Aksum, being finally stored in the church of Our Lady of Zion. According to Ethiopians, it is the place where it still remains to this day and is cared for by a priest. This priest, according to their traditions, would be a descendant of one of the Levites, who helped move and care for the ark on their journeys. This priest is the only person who is allowed to see the Ark of the Covenant kept in the church of Our Lady of Zion. And it was the case with the Levites according to the Jewish tradition. That's why it has not been possible to ratify its real permanence in this church, although all the archaeological evidence would indicate that this theory would be authentic. Among the various archaeological evidence, there are relics belonging to the Jewish people of the time of the Ark and which would belong to the Great Temple of Jerusalem. This last theory is supported by the fact that, strangely enough, the Ark is the central point of Christian worship and adoration in Ethiopia. Each of the 20,000 temples in Ethiopia contains a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. Ethiopia's holy book, the Kebra Nagast, tells the story of the transfers of the Ark to Menelik first. When King Solomon realized the theft, he thought of sending his army after his son, but he also dreamed that it was God's will and kept the disappearing of the Ark a secret. The version regarding Makeda and Solomon in the Orthodox Jewish tradition of the fallacia of Ethiopia is practically identical to that of the Kebra Nagast. Despite being a story dismissed by Western historians, Ethiopians accept it without hesitation. They are convinced that the original Ark was brought to Aksum in the first millennium before Christ, and that it has remained there ever since. Recently, the abbot of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims to have seen the Ark of the Covenant with his own eyes. The Ark in Jerusalem. Book 2 of the Maccabees contains reference to some writings that mention that the prophet Jeremiah, when warned by Hashem before the Babylonian invasion, took the ark out of the temple and had it buried in a cave of Mount Nebo. In this sense, it is worth mentioning that from this location there are several theories or stories that postulate that it would have been found and even possibly taken somewhere else. But the groups of rabbis states that after the fall of the city of Jerusalem, which resulted in the destruction and sacking of the first temple by the Babylonians, the ark would have been buried on Mount Moriah, where the ancient temple would have been located. According to these religious, the sacred chest is not mentioned among the treasures returned by the Persians, so it must have survived the looting when buried by the Levites. The latter would have died in the fall of the city without disclosing the location of the ark. Today, their search is almost impossible, because in that site the Dome of the Rock rises, and had a various serious religious conflict would take place. In an interview for The Telegraph, Rabbi Chaim Richman, the director of the Temple Institute, whose purpose is to promote the reconstruction of Solomon's third temple in Israel, pointed out that the Ark of the Covenant would be hidden 1 kilometer away in subway chambers, dug in the days of Solomon. Jeremiah predicted a time when the Ark of the Covenant would no longer exist, but indicated that it wouldn't be missed, and that it would not harm the worshippers of Yahweh not to have it. Instead, they would call Jerusalem the throne of Yahweh. In the Apocalypse, John says, in the sanctuary of his temple in heaven was seen the ark of his covenant. Revelation 11:15-19. Cave of Zedekiah. The cave of Zedekiah, also called the Quarries of Solomon, was great historical importance in Freemasonry. It is a subway limestone quarry of 20,000 square meters that extend below the Masonic quarter of the old city of Jerusalem, specifically to the east of the Damascus Gate, and has a depth of 300 meters below the northern part of the wall that surrounds the old city. It was carved over a period of several thousand years and is a remnant of Jerusalem's largest quarry, which extends from the grotto of Jeremiah and the garden tomb in the walls of the old city. According to experts, it could have been a quarry where in time of Herod the Great, stone was obtained to build the temple. The garden tomb is a tomb in Jerusalem that is believed to have been the tomb of Jesus of Nazareth by Protestants, Evangelicals, Anglicans, and other less numerous groups. The Masons of Israel hold an annual ceremony in the cave of Zedekiah and consider it one of the most revered sites of their history. Masonic ritual claims that King Solomon was the first Grand Master, and some Masons claim that the cave is definitively Solomon's quarry. Since the days of the British Mandate in the 1920s, the cave has been used for the ceremony of the Master Mason of the Mark. Ron Wyatt discoveries. However, Ron Wyatt, an amateur biblical archaeologist who became famous for claiming to have discovered many places and artifacts related to biblical archaeology, places the ark in what is called the Garden of the Grave, on the Mount of the Skull in Jerusalem, called Calvary. Ronald Eldon Wyatt was an amateur explorer of biblical archaeology who claimed to have discovered the evidence of some biblical stories. From 1977 until his death in 1999, Wyatt made over 100 trips to the Middle East. His research covered a wide variety of places and artifacts described in the Bible. Wyatt claimed to have found the Ark of the Covenant and the stones with the 10 Commandments in Jeremiah's grotto under Mount Calvary, which was the site of Jesus' crucifixion. He claimed to have found the blood of Christ spilled on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant and at the site of the crucifixion, which would seal the new divine covenant. Jeremiah's grotto was sealed with cement, with concrete, by the government of Israel after the death of several Jewish soldiers who went into the cave in search of the ark, whose bodies had to be rescued by Ron Wyatt, because everyone who approaches the ark without being prepared dies. According to Ron Wyatt, the ark should have been hidden between the year 18 of Josiah, when we are told that he took it to the Temple of Solomon, and 30 years later, when the temple was destroyed, the Calvary. The Calvary, also known as Golgotha, was a site that was located near the outside of the walls of Jerusalem. Here, according to the Gospel, Jesus was crucified. In the Greek text of Matthew, Mark and John, it is translated as the place of the skull poured into Latin as Calvarie locus, from which the English word Calvary derives. In Luke's Gospel, it is simply called the place of the skull. The traditional location of the Golgotha derives from identification by Helen, the mother of Constantine I, in the year 325. A few meters away, Helen identified the location of Jesus' tomb and said she had discovered the true cross of Veracruz. Her son Constantine built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in that setting. Constantine or Constantine, I'm not sure. Constantine, I think. The temple treasure. The copper scroll discovered in 1952 near Qumran on the shores of the Dead Sea is an archaeological mystery. The enigmatic Dead Sea copper scroll reveals the location where Jeremiah hid the Ark of the Temple of Jerusalem. Jim Barfield believes that he has deciphered a 2,000 years old message. This researcher says he has concluded that it is a treasure map that leads to the hidden place of the lost temple utensils. The gold and silver listed on the scroll was money accumulated from Bar Kokhba's revolt against the Romans after the destruction of the Second Temple. In the year 2006, Barfield set out to discover the truth of the copper scroll, following the footsteps of Bentley Jones, a Texas preacher turned biblical archaeologist. Jones believed that Qumran was the hidden place of the temple's vessels, and spent 30 years searching for it. Using the copper scroll as a guide, John discovered a small jar of persimmon oil, which was used to anoint kings and high priests, and a large quantity of what he believed to be the temple incense. This finding fits precisely with a description in the second book of the Maccabees, a 2nd century Greek text narrating the revolt against Antiochus. The book describes the prophet Jeremiah, who, with the help of 5 men, hid the sacred objects of the temple to protect them from the Babylonian conquerors, sealing the cave with care and recording the locations on a copper tablet. For the moment, Barfield's investigation is stalled, awaiting government permission. The construction of the third temple is an explosive political issue, and finding the royal vessels of the temple would bring that issue to the fore. Barfield believes that public opinion can tip the balance and help calm the opposition. Description: the Ark of the Covenant is a Bible account that describes a wooden chest covered with gold, which, according to Jewish tradition, was designed and created by divine command to keep the tables of the 10 Commandments. The episode is set approximately 1 year after the Exodus from Egypt. The ark was created following the model that Yahweh would have given to Moses when the Jews camped at the foot of Mount Sinai. It was later placed in the lavish temple of Jerusalem, built by Solomon. There are those who maintain that these were the second tablets and the remains of the first. On the other hand, others maintain that the Torah scroll was also kept there. The Ark of the Covenant was an icon where the presence of God himself resided. The ancient Hebrews had such reverence for the Ark that its adobe was the most holy place of God's tabernacle, where no one could enter but the high priest once a year, carrying incense and blood of the lamb upon himself, and above all beings free from sin, so as not to perish. Zimbabwe. The Africa Lemba tribe, which boasts of Jewish descent, was stating in its tradition that their ancestors, when they arrived in southern Africa, brought with them a sacred relay called Noma Lungundu, or the voice of God, which was one hidden in a cave deep in the Dumge Mountains, their spiritual home, until it was taken to a museum, where it is now located. Based on this, researcher Tudor Parfitt, who has a literalist approach to the biblical history, postulates in this research that Ngoma Lungundu is related to the Ark. His hypothesis is based on the fact that the object described by the Lemba people has similar attributes to the Ark, such as that Ngoma Lungundu is of similar size, that it was moved only by the priests, and that it was not allowed to touch the ground, that it was worshipped as a voice of their god, or that it was used as a weapon of great power. Parfitt analyzed this artifact with radiocarbon, dating it to around 1350, which coincided with the sudden end of the Great Zimbabwe. Parfitt suggests that the Ngoma Lungundu was found descends from the biblical Ark, and that it was reconstructed throughout history. Parfitt offers the suggestion that the biblical Ark, like the Ngoma Lungundu, was a wooden structure covered with a piece of leather, and that it was always a drum, as well as a weapon of some kind, just like the Ngoma. I don't believe this. And that is all for today. Thanks a lot, friends.